Thanks, Terry. Okay, that's, I mean, scientists like to disagree, so I'm sure there are other perspectives of science out here, but, I was just at a meeting of the Council of Science and Statistical meeting this week, and we heard that, a kind of a similar presentation from Milani Chalupka, too, so there does seem to be, some consensus on this issue. Okay, so let's assume for the moment that things are looking up for the green sea turtle, as we have just heard, and when populations that are threatened or endangered are on the upswing, when they appear to be recovering, as a society, we generally view that as a good thing, and we talk about, okay, well, what happens next? So I think next it would make sense to hear from Lance Smith a little about, okay, well, if a population looks like it's recovering, what happens? How do we decide whether it's ready to be delisted, or how does that discussion begin? And then what's that process of delisting, and how does that work?
Thank you, Stuart. I appreciate that. And it's a privilege to be on this panel. And I just wanted to start out by saying it's purely a coincidence that the two bald Hallies are sitting together. And by way of introduction, just like Dave Itano was saying, the purpose of the Federal Endangered Species Act is to recover species to the point where federal protection is no longer necessary. That's what the federal ESA is all about: preventing extinction, recovering the species, and getting them off the list. So therefore, the federal ESA has a process for formally removing species from the list. So Stuart asked the question, how do species get removed or delisted from the Endangered Species Act? Well, there's really three criteria that a species needs to have to be considered for delisting. First of all, the population has to be recovered and stable or increasing. And second of all, the threats to the population need to be under control. And finally, a recovery plan, a management plan needs to be in place to maintain the population after it's delisted. So three things. The population is stable and increasing, the threats are under control, and there's a management plan in place. Now, it's a bit more complicated than that for Honu. And in order to explain what I mean by that, I want to take a step back and explain how species are listed under the ESA in the first place. So a species can be listed at the species level, at the subspecies level, or at the population level. Back in 1978, all green turtles in the world were listed at the species level. Subspecies were not recognized, and populations were not recognized either. So quite a few years have went by, and in order for Honu to be delisted under the ESA, first of all, Honu would have to be designated as a distinct population under the ESA. And then the other three criteria that I mentioned would have to be met. The population has recovered and is stable or increasing, the threats are under control, and a management plan is in place to maintain the population after delisting. So what are we doing to address these things? NOAA Fisheries is starting out on a global status review of all green turtles in the world. The first and most important step in that status review process will be to determine the number of populations that exist within the green turtle species throughout the entire world. How many populations are there? After that determination is made, then for each population, there will be a process where the status is determined for the population and the threats are determined for the population. So those are the three things that will be accomplished by our global green turtle status review. And then the state, like Earl's going to be talking about, is already working on a management plan for maintaining the population if delisting occurs. So I just want to say that we're working on these four criteria for delisting. There's no guarantee that those criteria are going to be met. We might look at all the criteria and determine that green turtles in Hawaii are not a distinct population, or that some of the other criteria are not met. We don't know yet. We're just starting down that path.
Hold your applause, please. I'm just going to ask a quick follow-up question. That sounds like kind of a lengthy bureaucratic thing. Like, do you have any? Is there a time frame within which these decisions and the research associated with them usually occurs from when you start?
That's a great question. Well, as I said, in 1978, green turtles were listed throughout the world. All green turtles, the entire species is listed under the federal ESA. So the process of doing the global green turtle status review is a pretty lengthy scientific process. Right now, we're collecting the data on the nesting females and on the genetics for green turtles all over the world in order to determine how many distinct populations there are. I'm not trying to avoid the question by saying, I don't know how long this is going to take. But honestly, I don't know how long it's going to take. There is no statutory time frame. We are not required by law to complete the status review within a certain period of time. So it's going to take a while. I'm not able to say how long that's going to take. It's just a long process. That's the best I can do on answering that question.